My name is Walter Briggs. I am 66 years old, a widower, and for nearly 4 decades I worked down at the shipyards in Seattle, welding hulls and shaping steel with a precision that only years of repetition can give. The shipyard whistles still echo in my bones. Even now, 4 years into retirement, my body rises at 5:30 every morning, as if waiting for the horn to send me out onto the docks. Old habits, I suppose. Old bones remember. The house I live in is a small craftsman-style place up on a hill, with cedar shingles weathered gray from rain and sea air. I built much of it myself back when I was still young and Linda, my wife, was alive. Linda filled the house with color. Curtains she sewed, the faint scent of lavender sachets in every drawer. Photographs of our only boy Daniel, from the day he could walk until the day he put on a suit and tie and left for college. She's been gone 4 years now. Cancer, quick and merciless. The house has been quiet ever since. Too quiet, the kind of silence that presses on your chest and reminds you that no one else is in the next room. I start the coffee pot. I drink mine black and so strong it can practically stand on its own in the cup. Linda used to tease me, said one day it would eat through my stomach lining. But the shipyard coffee was worse, and I survived that. I pour a steaming cup, step out onto the porch, and look across Puget Sound. The early light paints the water silver. A gull screeches somewhere overhead. In the distance, the ferries push through the mist toward Bainbridge Island. My workshop sits off to the side of the yard. A shed of cedar planks filled with tools, sawdust, and the smell of pine. Since retirement, I've carved small wooden figures, boats, salmon, sometimes bald eagles. Not art, really, just something to keep my hands from going idle. Linda always said I had a knack for it, though I knew she was being kind. By 10 in the morning, I was bent over a block of maple, trying to coax the rough wings of an eagle out of its grain, when the phone buzzed on the bench. The name made my chest tighten. Daniel. He doesn't call often. Not anymore. I wipe my hands on a rag and answer. Dan? His voice comes quick, polished, the same voice he uses for clients, I imagine. Hey, Dad, how are you holding up? I'm fine, I reply. Why the call in the middle of the week? Something wrong? There's a laugh on the line, but it sounds hollow. No, nothing's wrong. Just wanted to check in. That's never true. Daniel never calls without a reason. I wait. The pause stretches until he finally exhales. Actually, there is one thing. Remember how I told you Clara's parents were flying in this weekend? We were going to have a family dinner at Harbor Light Saturday night. I remember, I say carefully. Harbor Light, new restaurant downtown, sleek and expensive, the kind of place Daniel likes to show off. Well, there's been a mix-up. They botched our reservation. No table Saturday. We had to cancel the whole thing. Maybe next time they come, we'll reschedule. My hand tightens around the phone. Canceled? Of course. Somehow, whenever Clara's parents are in town, there's always a reason I can't join. Too busy, too tired, too complicated. I force my voice calm. I see. Silence again. Then Daniel clears his throat. And Dad, this is awkward, but we're a little short this month on the mortgage. Could you spot us maybe $2,000, just until my bonus comes in? I'll pay you back, promise. There it is, the real reason. I stare down at my hands, scarred and calloused, veins like twisted rope from years at the docks. Hands that built this house, hands that bought Daniel his first bicycle, his textbooks, his suits for college interviews, hands that kept him fed and clothed when I worked double shifts in the freezing rain. Now those hands are just a checkbook he opens when he needs a bailout. 2,000, I repeat slowly. Just until the bonus, Dad. I swear. His voice is smoother now, relieved because he knows I'll say yes. I always do. Since Linda died, These calls, these requests, are the only real contact I have with him. If I refuse, the phone will stay silent, and silence is a heavier weight than debt. "All right," I say at last. "I'll transfer it this afternoon. You're the best, Dad, really. You'll have it back in no time." He doesn't mean it. We both know that. We talk a little longer, about his job, about how Clara just got promoted, about a new car he's considering. Not once does he ask how I am, or when he and Clara might come by. No invitation to see their place, no suggestion of a Sunday meal, just city talk and business gloss. When the call ends, the workshop feels colder than before. I sit on the stool, staring at the half-carved eagle. Its wings are crooked, jagged, half-formed, as if trying to escape the block, but trapped by my clumsy hands. Maybe it's me that's trapped in the belief that my son still needs me for more than money. I think back to when Daniel was a boy, how his eyes lit up the first time I took him fishing on Lake Washington, the way he gripped the line and shouted when a perch tugged, how he used to fall asleep in the cab of my truck, head on my shoulder, smelling of rain and sawdust. Back then, I was his hero. Now, I'm just a wallet. I push the carving aside. The chisel slips, gouging a deep line across the wood. A ruin. My stomach twists. From the porch, I watch the water again. Clouds have rolled in, the sky gone gray. A ferry horn moans low across the bay. Linda's voice echoes in memory. "Family is what you build, Walter, not what you buy." I close my eyes and wonder if she would forgive me for raising a son who has forgotten where he came from. Hook. That night, as I lay in the empty bed, I couldn't shake the suspicion that Daniel's story about the canceled dinner wasn't the truth. The next morning, Seattle skies were a flat sheet of gray, the kind that promised rain by noon. My joints ached worse than usual, as if the weather was reminding me that time was running faster than I could catch it. I made strong coffee and stepped out to the porch, but even the familiar view of the Sound didn't bring peace. Daniel's voice from yesterday echoed in my head. "Dinner's canceled. The restaurant messed up." I wanted to believe him, wanted to push away the gnawing doubt. But Linda's voice, or maybe my own conscience, kept whispering, "Something isn't right." I decided to distract myself with errands. The workshop needed new sandpaper, and the old jigsaw blade had dulled to the point it chewed wood instead of cutting it. I drove my old Ford pickup down the narrow hill road into town. The engine sputtered, coughed, then caught. She was a stubborn truck, but so was I. Downtown Ballard still had the bones of the old fishing community, though coffee shops and boutiques had long since crowded out most of the bait stores and taverns. At the hardware store, I filled a basket with tools and varnish. At the counter, I ran into my neighbor Gus Marino, a retired fisherman with a booming laugh and the kind of nose you only get from 40 years of salt wind. "Walter," he said, clapping my shoulder hard enough to rattle my teeth. "Didn't expect to see you here this early. Stocking up, huh?" "Trying to keep busy," I answered. Gus always had an eye for the things people didn't say. "You hear your boy's in-laws are in town?" he asked casually, bagging a coil of rope. My chest tightened. "I heard," I said carefully. "He told me." "Yeah?" Gus raised an eyebrow. "Funny thing. I saw Daniel yesterday evening down by the wine shop on Market Street. Big order. 2 cases at least. And flowers, too. Fancy lilies. Guess they're doing it up real nice." A cold weight settled in my stomach. Wine and flowers. For a canceled dinner? I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Probably something Clara wanted." Gus snorted. "Maybe. But from where I stand, looks like they're getting ready to host quite the feast. You going?" "They said it was canceled." Gus paused, studying me. "Huh. Well, maybe they just rescheduled. You know how kids are these days." He gave my shoulder another hearty pat, then left, whistling as if he hadn't just split me open with doubt. I carried my bag of tools to the truck and sat behind the wheel, staring out at the rain starting to speckle the windshield. 2 cases of wine. Flowers. Gus wouldn't make that up. My son was preparing for a dinner I wasn't meant to attend. By the time I got home, I couldn't shake it anymore. I wiped sawdust off my hands, picked up the phone, and dialed. Harbor Light, the new restaurant everyone in the city was buzzing about. "Harbor Light, good afternoon," said a cheerful woman's voice. "Yes, hello," I said, trying to sound casual. "Could you check if there's a reservation under the name Briggs? Saturday evening." "One moment," she replied. I heard clacking keys, a pause. "Yes, sir. Briggs, party of 6, Saturday at 7 p.m. Confirmed." My mouth went dry. "No cancellations?" "No, sir. Everything is in order." I managed a stiff "thank you" and hung up. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. Daniel lied. Flat out lied. Not just a mistake or misunderstanding. A deliberate fabrication to keep me away. I sat heavily in my armchair, staring at the framed photo of Linda on the mantel. She wore her Sunday dress, her hair caught by the wind, smiling at me like she always did when she believed in me more than I believed in myself. "What did we do wrong, Linda?" I whispered. "Why does he think I'm not good enough?" The clock ticked loud in the silence. My mind drifted back to simpler days. Daniel, as a boy in muddy sneakers, hammering nails crooked into scrap wood beside me, proud of every bent board we pieced together. His laughter echoing on the docks when he caught his first fish. His hand slipping into mine when storms rattled the roof. Back then, he looked at me like I was the strongest man alive. Now he looked at me like I was baggage. I pressed my palms against my knees, breathing hard. I could feel the anger rising, not fiery, but slow, heavy, like molten metal filling a mold. Not because I wasn't invited, but because my own son thought he had to lie to hide me. That night, I sat in the workshop carving long into the hours, the chisel biting deep into the block of maple. The eagle's wings stretched wider under my hands, but the wood cracked along the grain, splitting in two. I set the broken pieces on the bench and stared at them. Maybe it wasn't just the carving that was broken. Maybe it was something between me and my son, too. Hook. As the rain hammered the roof, I made up my mind. If Daniel wouldn't tell me the truth, I'd see it with my own eyes. Saturday evening arrived like a storm cloud I had seen coming all week. I spent the day restless, pacing from the porch to the workshop, pretending to sand an old carving, pretending to read the newspaper. Nothing stuck. My mind was fixed on Harbor Light and the reservation I was never meant to know about. By 6 o'clock, I stood in front of the bedroom mirror, staring at a man I hardly recognized. The navy suit I pulled from the closet hung looser on my frame than I remembered. Years of grief had carved me thinner. I ran a razor across my jaw, combed what was left of my gray hair, and polished the cracked leather shoes that had carried me to Linda's funeral. They weren't new or fashionable, but they were clean. For a long moment, I hesitated over the tie. Too formal, I thought, too desperate. I left it on the dresser. Let them see me as I am. The old Ford sputtered 3 times before catching, as if even the truck wasn't sure it wanted me to go. I patted the dashboard. Come on, old boy. Tonight we see the truth. Downtown glowed with weekend energy. Couples arm in arm under umbrellas, valet drivers dashing between cars, neon lights bleeding across wet pavement. I parked a block away from Harbor Light, under the shadow of a shuttered bookstore. From there, I could see the restaurant clearly. Harbor Light was a converted brick warehouse with towering windows that reached from floor to ceiling. Inside, golden light spilled across polished tables, crystal glasses, and waiters moving like clockwork. The kind of place that hummed with wealth and whispers. I crossed the street slowly, pretending to study the window display of a boutique. The clock on my phone read 6:55. I didn't have to wait long. At 7:05, Daniel's silver Lexus pulled up to the curb, slick and gleaming under the streetlight. He stepped out in a tailored gray suit, hair slicked back, looking every inch the polished professional. Clara followed in a black dress that shimmered like oil on water. They looked like they belonged there, part of that glittering world. Behind them, another couple stepped out of a cab. Clara's parents. I had only seen them twice. Once at the wedding, once at Linda's funeral. Even after years, I remembered the cool appraisal in their eyes, the way they'd shaken my hand as though handling something foreign. Tonight, Professor Northwood wore a pressed jacket and silk scarf, while his wife Vanessa's pearls gleamed against her throat. Their wealth was the kind you didn't need to flaunt, it just radiated. Minutes later, another cab delivered Clara's younger brother and his fiancée. 6 in total, a full table, not one seat left open. My chest felt hollow, a father cut out of his own family portrait. I lingered in the shadows until the maitre d' led them inside. They were shown to a table near the windows, a perfect view for me. I followed a few steps behind, pushing the restaurant door open. The maitre d' greeted me with a practiced smile. "Good evening, sir. Do you have a reservation?" "No," I said quietly. "Just one seat if you have it." He frowned at his list. "I'm sorry, sir. We are fully booked tonight." I glanced around. At the far end of the room, I spotted a small bar. "What about there?" The maitre d' nodded reluctantly. "The bar's open seating. This way." The bar was tucked into a corner, half in shadow, but it offered a clear line of sight across the dining room. From there, I could see Daniel's table as though watching a stage play. I ordered a whiskey on the rocks. The bartender slid the glass toward me, and I sipped, feeling the burn anchor me in place. Through the haze of clinking glasses and murmured conversation, I watched my son laugh, watched him gesture animatedly as if telling a grand story. Clara leaned into his arm, glowing with pride. Her parents nodded approvingly, their eyes filled with the warmth they had never shown me. Plates arrived, delicate towers of salmon tartar, roasted duck with fennel, things I'd never pronounce right if I tried. A bottle of wine followed, its cork popping like a pistol shot. Daniel pulled out a sleek black credit card and handed it to the waiter with an easy smile. My stomach twisted when I recognized it. It wasn't his, it was mine. The emergency card I had given him 2 years ago, meant for hospital bills or car breakdowns. Not for this, not for showing off at Harbor Light. I gripped my glass so tight it squeaked. Whiskey burned down my throat, but anger burned hotter in my chest. For a long while, I told myself maybe I was wrong. Maybe this wasn't the dinner Gus had spoken of. Maybe Daniel truly had no choice. Maybe, but the excuses rang hollow. I knew what I was seeing. They were feasting, laughing, raising glasses, a family whole and proud. And I was watching from the shadows, a ghost in my own bloodline. The bartender came back, wiping a glass. "Another drink, sir?" I nodded. My voice was low, hoarse. "Yeah, another." As he poured, I fixed my gaze on the table across the room. They looked happy, at ease, as if the world had no edges sharp enough to cut them. My son smiled, the kind of smile I hadn't seen aimed at me in years. And for the first time in my life, I realized I was no longer part of his world. Hook. I set my glass down and stood, my eyes fixed on their table. If Daniel wouldn't tell me the truth, then I'd have to hear it myself, straight from his own lips. I left the bar stool slowly, as if my legs were made of iron. The whiskey churned in my stomach, but it wasn't the liquor that made my head spin. It was the sight of my son holding court at a table that had no room for me. I adjusted my jacket, tried to make myself smaller, and moved toward the restrooms. The path curved just close enough to their table that I could hear if I wanted to. and I wanted to. At first, it was just noise. Laughter, forks against porcelain, the hum of conversation in the restaurant. Then a voice rose above it. Daniel's. He actually thinks I'm going to pay him back. Every time. Just nods and wires the money. His words were casual, tossed out like a joke. The table chuckled. Clara leaned in, resting her hand on his sleeve. Your father's too trusting. But really, isn't it his own fault? He practically forces help on us. Exactly, Daniel said, lowering his voice into a mocking growl. Do you need money, son? Let me give you some. For God's sake. The whole table erupted, even Clara's brother, even her pearl-draped mother. The laughter rolled over me like a wave. Clara's father, Professor Northwood, lifted his glass. Well, to the generosity of Mr. Briggs, the invisible patron of our fine evening. They clinked glasses, raised them high. My son joined in. The air drained from my lungs. I stopped dead in the aisle, gripping the back of a chair to keep myself steady. My ears roared with blood, but the voices cut through. Remember when he showed up at our wedding in that awful suit? Clara giggled. Mother nearly fainted. Her mother sniffed. That suit looked like something pulled out of a thrift store bin. I wondered if he even owned anything else. Daniel smirked. That was his big event suit. He wore it to my graduation, to Mom's funeral, like it was the height of formality. Oh, how quaint, Vanessa said with a smirk. But really, darling, maybe it's time you told him to update his closet. If he insists on going out in public, what's the point? Daniel waved dismissively. He spends most of his time up in that shack on the hill anyway. Austere woodsman. Nobody sees him. Shack. The house I built with my own hands. The house where Linda and I raised him. Where every nail was hammered in after long days at the docks. Where every board held memories. Shack. Quentin Northwood leaned back in his chair. And thank God for that. I can't imagine what my colleagues would say if I introduced a retired dock worker with an 8th grade education as family. Can you imagine? Baseball stories at the club? No, thank you. The laughter swelled again. Each note was a blade. My fingernails dug into my palm so hard I felt the sting of blood. Then Daniel's voice cut through, softer but clearer. You wouldn't believe it, but he just wired me $2,000 for the mortgage. And here we are, paying for this dinner with it. They raised their glasses again. To Walter Briggs, Clara said sweetly, her voice dripping irony, our endless supply. My vision blurred. I turned quickly and stumbled toward the restrooms. Inside, I leaned against the sink, splashed cold water on my face, and forced myself to breathe. The man in the mirror stared back at me, eyes red, jaw trembling. An old man. A fool. How could you be so wrong about your own son? I whispered. The water ran in rivulets down my cheeks, soaking my collar. But I didn't care. For years, I told myself Daniel was busy. That city life made visits hard. That his requests for money were genuine emergencies. That one day, when life settled, he'd come back around and see me not as a wallet, but as his father again. But I had just heard the truth, clear as church bells. He didn't respect me. He didn't even tolerate me. He ridiculed me, paraded me as a punchline in front of people who already looked at me like dirt under their shoes. I braced my hands on the sink, trembling. The old man in the mirror didn't look like the shipyard worker who raised a boy on rain-soaked streets. He looked broken, hollowed out by betrayal. I dried my face with a paper towel and walked back out. I didn't look at their table. I couldn't. I walked straight to the bar, dropped a 20 on the counter, and left without another word. Outside, the night air was sharp with salt and rain. Seattle lights blurred in the drizzle. I walked to my truck, each step heavier than the last. Inside the cab, I didn't start the engine. I just sat, gripping the wheel, staring at nothing. I thought of Linda, thought of her gentle voice saying, "Family is what you build." And I thought of Daniel raising a glass with my money, laughing with people who would never see me as anything but an embarrassment. In that moment, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was resolve. Hook. If my son believed I was nothing more than an old fool with a wallet, then it was time to show him what happens when the old fool stops playing along. The following morning, the rain had not let up. It hammered the roof in steady sheets, drumming against the windows, making the world outside a blur of gray water. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee gone cold, staring at the silent phone. I kept hearing Daniel's voice, casual, mocking. He actually thinks I'll pay him back. By noon, I couldn't stand the walls closing in anymore. I pulled on my raincoat, grabbed my keys, and drove across town to the small duplex where my old Navy buddy, Howard Lane, lived. Howard and I had known each other for 40 years. We served on the same destroyer back in the 70s, two boys who thought the sea would make them men. He went on to college after, sharp with numbers, and eventually became a forensic accountant with the Washington State Auditor's Office. He'd retired a few years back, but retirement hadn't dulled the way his mind worked. If anyone could help me make sense of what Daniel had done, it was Howard. When he opened the door, he squinted at me through the rain. "Walter Briggs, what storm blew you here?" "Not the weather," I said quietly. "Can I come in?" Inside, the place smelled of strong coffee and pipe tobacco. The walls were lined with shelves of old Navy photos, binders, and accounting textbooks thick enough to stop a bullet. Howard set 2 mugs of coffee on the table and sat down opposite me. "All right," he said, his tone sharpening. "What's the trouble?" I hesitated, then told him everything. The canceled dinner, Harbor Light, the wine, the flowers, what I overheard, the card, my card, the toast in my name. Howard listened without interruption, his eyes narrowing behind thick glasses. When I finished, his jaw was tight. "Son of a bitch," he muttered. "You're telling me he's been using your emergency card to entertain his in-laws?" "Yes." My voice cracked. "And laughing about it." Howard leaned back, tapping a finger on the table. "Walter, I don't want to make this worse, but I need to ask. Has Daniel ever had you sign papers? Insurance, tax, anything like that?" I thought back. Daniel showing up with a stack of forms one afternoon 2 years ago, telling me it was just health insurance paperwork that needed a quick signature. I'd signed without reading, trusting him. "Yes," I admitted, "once or twice." Howard cursed under his breath. "That's bad, real bad. I've seen this trick before. Children filing fraudulent deductions, pretending they pay for an elderly parent's medical or housing expenses. The IRS calls it false dependent care claims. If he's done that in your name, he's not just taking money. He's committing fraud. Federal fraud." My hands clenched around the mug. "You mean he could go to prison?" "If it's true? Absolutely," Howard said. "Especially if there are loans, credit lines, or forged authorizations. The IRS doesn't play around with fake dependents or forged power of attorney." The words sank like stones in my gut. My son, fraud, federal prison. I wanted to recoil, to deny it, but deep down I knew. The arrogance I'd seen at that table, the easy way he lied, it all fit. Howard's voice softened. "Walter, I know this hurts, but you can't keep letting him bleed you dry. You've got to protect yourself." "How?" I asked, my throat raw. "First, cancel that card, today. Second, we'll request your IRS transcript, see what's been filed under your name. Third, if there's fraud, we hand it to the auditor and the IRS. You'll be protected as the victim. He'll take the fall." I sat there in silence, my heart torn in 2 directions. This was my son, my only child. Turning him in felt like severing the last thread connecting us. But hadn't he already cut it himself? Hadn't he laughed while he did it? Howard leaned forward. Walter, listen to me. This isn't about revenge. It's about dignity. You worked your whole life. You buried Linda with your own hands, and you built that house on the hill. Don't let him reduce you to a joke at a dinner table. Make him answer for what he's done. I closed my eyes. Linda's face rose in my memory, her voice steady. Family is what you build. Maybe what I needed now was not to cling to family, but to protect what I had built from being destroyed. All right, I said finally. Let's do it. Howard slid a yellow legal pad across the table. Then start by writing everything you remember. Dates, amounts, conversations. Leave nothing out. And Walter, prepare yourself. Once this begins, there's no going back. My hand shook as I picked up the pen. Each word I wrote felt like carving into stone. Dates, transfers, the time Daniel swore he'd pay me back, the time he called for emergency rent, the $2,000 just this week. By the time I finished, my hand ached. I set the pen down, breathing hard. Howard placed a steady hand on mine. You just signed your first affidavit. It's the first step in taking your life back. I nodded, though the weight in my chest was heavier than ever. Hook. That night, as I drove home through the storm, one thought repeated in my mind like a drumbeat. My son had made me into a fool. But tomorrow, for the first time, I would stop playing along. The week that followed felt like walking on the edge of a knife. I went about my days quietly, tending the yard, fixing the hinge on the shed door, carving scraps of pine into shapes I didn't finish. But beneath it all, a storm churned. I was waiting for Howard's call, waiting to know if my suspicions about Daniel were just the bitter imagination of an old man, or if the truth was far uglier. On Thursday, the phone rang. Howard's voice was clipped, all business. Walter, we need to meet, tonight. At his duplex, Howard already had files spread across the kitchen table, pages covered in numbers, printouts, and highlighted lines. His expression told me everything before he even spoke. It's worse than we thought, he said. I sat down slowly. How bad? Howard tapped a stack of IRS transcripts. For the last 3 years, Daniel has been filing fraudulent claims in your name. Elderly care deductions, medical expenses that don't exist, even utility bills supposedly paid on your behalf. Roughly $12,000 a year. My stomach clenched. He used me as a prop to cheat the government. Howard nodded grimly. And that's just the beginning. He slid another folder across. I pulled your credit history. Walter, there are 3 loans, combined total of nearly $50,000, all in your name. I froze. The words made no sense at first. That can't be. I never signed for them? Howard cut in gently. I know, which is why this line here matters. He pointed to a box labeled Authorized by Power of Attorney. My throat tightened. I remembered the papers Daniel had handed me, telling me it was just health insurance. I had signed without reading. He'd used me to open a door, then walk through it like he owned the place. Howard's voice dropped. That's not just fraud. That's felony forgery. And if he's bold enough to do this, Walter, there may be more. Shell accounts, business write-offs in your name. We've just scratched the surface. I stared at the papers, the neat lines of numbers, the cold print of my own name twisted into lies. A buzzing filled my ears. My son hadn't just mocked me. He hadn't just stolen money. He had taken my identity, carved me into a tool, used me like lumber from the yard, raw material for his schemes. I felt sick. Howard pushed a pen toward me. We'll build a case. I'll get you an appointment with the state auditor. You'll be protected as a victim, Walter. But we need to catch him in the act. If you confront him now, he'll just deny everything, maybe even bury the evidence. We need him exposed. I swallowed hard. How? we set a trap. You invite him out. Harbor Light again, maybe. Somewhere public. You act like you're ready to reconcile, to hand him another check if that's what he wants. Meanwhile, the IRS and state detectives are sitting 2 tables over. The thought chilled me. You want me to lure my own son into a sting? Howard met my eyes. I want you to stop him before he ruins you completely. He's already ruined himself. I looked down at Linda's photograph in my wallet. Her smile was warm, alive. She would have hated this, but she would have hated more what Daniel had become. Do it, I whispered. Howard nodded, scribbling notes. We'll schedule it for next Saturday. I'll contact my people. You just have to play your part. The rest of that night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing the words I might say. The phrases twisted in my head. Anger, grief, shame. How could you? Why me? But every time my throat locked. By Friday, I couldn't keep the storm inside any longer. I drove to the churchyard where Linda was buried. The grass was wet, the headstones shining under a weak sun. I knelt by her grave, tracing her name on the granite. Linda, I said, my voice breaking. He's not the boy we raised. He's a stranger in our son's skin, and I don't know if I can forgive him for it. The wind rattled the birch trees nearby, a low, mournful sound. I closed my eyes. But I have to do this. If not for me, then for the man you believed I could be. I won't let him make me small, Linda. I won't. When I stood, something inside me had hardened. That night, I dialed Daniel. His voice was warm, surprised. Dad? Everything okay? Yes, I said evenly. I was thinking about that dinner last week. Maybe we should have our own. Just you, me, and Clara, at Harbor Light, my treat. There was a pause, then the smile in his voice. Sure, Dad. Saturday at 7? Yes, Saturday at 7. When I hung up, I stared out at the sound. The ferries moved slow across the water, their lights glowing in the dark. I wondered what Daniel saw when he looked at me these days. A wallet? A fool? He was about to find out I was something else entirely. Hook. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of fear shift into something sharper. Not despair, not weakness, resolve. My son thought he was playing me, but Saturday night, the stage would be his undoing. Saturday came cold and wet, the kind of night Seattle wears like a second skin. The city glistened under street lamps, every puddle reflecting red and gold. I pulled the navy suit from the closet again, brushed the dust from the shoulders, and buttoned it with hands that trembled less from age than from anticipation. Tonight wasn't just another dinner. Tonight was Judgment Day. Howard met me outside Harbor Light at 6:30. He wore a dark coat, his hair slick with rain. His eyes scanned the street with the sharpness of the Navy man he used to be. They're inside already, he said quietly. 2 auditors and 1 detective. They'll wait for the signal. I nodded, my mouth dry. When I stepped into the restaurant, the maitre d' recognized me from the week before. He seemed surprised, maybe even uncomfortable, but I held his gaze until he led me to a round table near the center of the room. I had requested it myself. I wanted no shadows tonight. At exactly 7, Daniel and Clara walked in. Daniel's suit was sharper than ever. Clara's dress glimmered like spilled ink under the lights. They spotted me and froze, just for a fraction of a second, then composed themselves and approached. Dad, Daniel said smoothly, leaning down to kiss my cheek. What a surprise. Not a surprise, I said, keeping my voice even. I invited you. Clara smiled tightly, though her eyes flicked around the room. This is nice. The waiter poured wine. My son raised his glass, trying to carry the moment. To reconciliation, he said, his voice full of performance. I did not raise mine. I looked him in the eyes instead. To the truth. The air shifted. Clara shifted in her seat, her smile faltering. We ate in silence for a few minutes, though I could hardly taste the food. The duck might as well have been ash in my mouth. I waited until the table was cleared, until glasses were refilled, and then I set my napkin aside. "Daniel," I said, my voice louder than I intended. A few heads turned at neighboring tables. "I know." He blinked. "Know what, Dad?" "The canceled dinner, the lies, the money you've taken, the loans in my name, the false tax claims." The blood drained from Clara's face. Daniel laughed nervously, leaning forward. "Dad, what are you talking about? You must be confused." I reached into my jacket and placed the folder Howard had given me on the table. "Am I confused? Or am I reading numbers you filed with the IRS? My signature on loans I never saw?" Daniel's hands twitched toward the folder, but I slid it back. "You think I don't know how you've used me?" My voice trembled, but not from fear. "How you turned me into a wallet, a joke to impress your in-laws. I was there, Daniel. I heard you raise a glass to me. I heard you laugh." Clara whispered, "Daniel." But he silenced her with a glare. Across the room, 2 men and 1 woman rose quietly from their table. Their suits looked ordinary, but their badges glinted as they approached. The restaurant murmured, forks pausing mid-air. "Mr. Daniel Briggs," one asked, voice firm. "Washington State Auditor's Office. You're under investigation for tax fraud, identity forgery, and misuse of power of attorney. We'll need you to come with us." Daniel's chair screeched as he pushed back. "This is a mistake," he stammered. "Dad, tell them. Tell them you signed—" "I signed nothing," I said, cutting him off. My voice rang louder than I expected, echoing through the restaurant. "You forged my name. You stole my trust. You disgraced your mother's memory. And you did it all while laughing at me like I was a fool." Gas rippled through the dining room. Clara's parents turned pale, staring as if the ground had opened beneath their feet. Clara shook her head furiously. "Daniel, you said your father—" "Quiet!" Daniel snapped, but his voice cracked with panic. The detective stepped in, pulling a set of cuffs from his belt. "Sir, please stand." Daniel surged to his feet, his face red, fists clenching. For a moment I thought he might bolt. Instead, he glared at me, fury twisting his features. "You ruined me," he hissed. "No," I said, my voice steady now. "You ruined yourself." The cuffs clicked shut. Claire buried her face in her hands. Clara's parents stood, mortified, their carefully constructed pride collapsing in the eyes of the entire room. As Daniel was led away, the whispers in the restaurant swelled into a storm. Diners craned their necks, eyes darting between me and the spectacle. I sat back down slowly, my hands folded in front of me. For the first time in years, I felt taller. Not because I had destroyed him, but because I had reclaimed myself. The lead auditor leaned close to me as they left. "You did the right thing, Mr. Briggs. He'll face the consequences now." I nodded numbly. My son disappeared through the doors, swallowed by the rain-soaked night. His laughter finally silenced. The waiter, pale as parchment, approached timidly. "Sir, would you like dessert?" I almost laughed, but it came out as a sigh. "No, just the check." As I signed, I felt the weight of every eye in the restaurant. Not pity, not mockery, something else. Recognition. That an old man had stood up and refused to be erased. When I stepped out into the night, the rain felt different on my face. Not cold. Cleansing. Hook. My son was gone, taken into the darkness of his own making. And yet, standing under the street lamp, I realized the fight wasn't about him anymore. It was about me, about finally claiming the dignity I had let him strip away for too long. The rain followed me home that night, drumming on the roof of my old house like an orchestra without rhythm. I hung my suit carefully in the closet, though I doubted I'd wear it again. My hands shook as I loosened the tie, not from fear, but from the hollow stillness left inside me. The showdown was over. My son was gone, taken by the officers into a future he had carved with his own lies. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table. The silence of the house pressed against me. Martha's photo stared from the mantel in the next room. For years I had spoken to that photo as if she were still here, asking for guidance, telling her about Daniel, about the orchard, about my aches and my quiet mornings. Tonight I had no words left. The phone rang close to midnight. Howard. "You all right?" he asked, his voice steady as a dock piling. "I don't know," I admitted. "Feels like I tore out my own heart and handed it to strangers." There was a pause. Then Howard said, "Sometimes doing the right thing feels like that. Doesn't mean it wasn't right." I closed my eyes, listening to the rain, letting his words settle. He told me that Daniel would likely face fines, restitution, probation. Prison was possible, but not certain. Clara, too, depending on how much she knew. The law would decide now, not me. After we hung up, I sat in the dark, thinking about all the nights I had waited for Daniel's calls, hoping for warmth, but always receiving requests. How I had wired money with trembling hands, not because I believed his stories, but because I was afraid of losing the last thread tying us together. That thread was gone now, cut by truth and by handcuffs. I slept little, drifting in and out of uneasy dreams where Martha stood among the apple trees, looking at me with sad but proud eyes. The days that followed blurred together. Neighbors stopped by, bringing casseroles and awkward sympathy. Some had seen the spectacle at Harbor Light. Others had heard whispers through town. For the first time, people spoke to me not as a relic of the sawmill, but as a man who had stood up for himself. And yet, inside, there was no triumph, only the ache of absence. On the third morning, I went to the orchard. The rain had washed the air clean, and the apple trees bent under the weight of ripe fruit. Martha and I had planted them when Daniel was just a boy. He used to climb the branches, laughing, tossing apples into my hands. That memory came sharp and clear, cutting deeper than any insult ever could. I picked one apple, polished it on my sleeve, and bit into it. The tartness filled my mouth, grounding me in the present. Life goes on, I thought. Trees grow, seasons turn, even when people fail you. Howard came by that afternoon. He found me on the porch with a basket of apples at my feet. "Thought you might need some company," he said, lowering himself into the chair beside me. We sat in silence for a long while, the way old friends can. Finally, he spoke. "You know, Walter, I spent years in the Navy thinking discipline was the hardest lesson. But it isn't. The hardest lesson is letting go of what you can't fix." I turned the apple in my hands. "He's still my son." "I know," Howard said softly. "But being your son doesn't excuse what he did. And it doesn't mean you have to keep carrying the weight of his choices." The sun broke through the clouds then, scattering light across the wet grass. I watched it glimmer on the orchard leaves. For the first time in years, I felt something stir inside me. Not joy, not relief, but possibility. That night, I made a decision. No more living in shadows of what Daniel might be. No more clinging to the hope that one day he would turn back into the boy who once thought I was his hero. That boy was gone, but I was still here. And as long as I was here, I had a life to live. In the weeks that followed, I filled my days with work in the workshop, carving chess pieces from the blocks of oak I'd been saving. I mended the fence along the orchard, baked bread with Martha's old recipe, even joined Howard for a fishing trip at Lake Union. For the first time in decades, I wasn't waiting for Daniel's call. Sometimes at night, when the wind rattled the shutters, I still thought of him. I wondered if he hated me, if he would ever understand why I had done what I did. Maybe he would someday. Maybe not. That was out of my hands now. One evening, I sat on the porch watching the sky fade from orange to purple. I thought of Martha again, of her words that family is what stays with you until the end, and I realized she hadn't been wrong. Family does stay, just not always the family you expect. Sometimes family is an old friend who stands by you when the world turns. Sometimes it's the neighbors who knock on your door with casseroles. Sometimes it's the orchard itself, whispering memories in the wind. And sometimes it's simply yourself, the part of you that refuses to bend, that insists on dignity, even when your own blood betrays you. I leaned back, listening to the quiet hum of crickets in the grass. For the first time since Martha died, I felt not empty, but whole. Betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from family, but it doesn't have to define you. Respect and love cannot be bought with money or held together with lies. In the end, dignity comes from standing up for yourself, even if it means standing alone.